The frontier town of Silver Ridge had witnessed its share of violence, but nothing compared to the legend that grew from the duel between two men whose names would carve themselves into the bones of history. It began on a blistering August afternoon when the sun hung like a molten coin in the sky, melting shadows into the dusty earth. Word traveled faster than a bullet. Colt, Iron Ice, Maddox was coming back. The outlaw who'd vanished 3 years earlier after a string of robberies, shootouts, and near-mythical escapes. He had been a ghost, a rumor whispered in saloons and campfires, until that morning when he walked into town like the desert itself had spit him out. And he wasn't alone. He carried a message, one written not on paper but in the cold fire of his eyes. He'd returned for one reason: to settle a score with Sheriff Elias Thorn. The sheriff wasn't just any lawman. He was the only man who had ever beaten Maddox. Their last fight had ended with Maddox wounded, humiliated, and exiled into the unknown. And now he was back for revenge. The air in Silver Ridge tightened as people scattered across the wooden sidewalks, slamming shutters and locking doors. Even the horses seemed uneasy, stomping and snorting as if they could sense the collision of two forces of fate. Sheriff Thorn stood tall on the steps of the jailhouse, his badge gleaming like a shard of the sun. He'd aged, but only in ways that made him harder. Deep lines carved from years of holding the town together and protecting it from men exactly like Maddox. When the outlaw stopped in front of him, the world felt like it was holding its breath. The wind died, the desert froze. Maddox's voice was low, steady, lethal. "I ain't here for bloodshed, not theirs anyways. Just you, Sheriff. One final duel. No running, no tricks. Just the truth of a man's aim." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He'd hoped his past with Maddox would stay buried, but the outlaw was right. There was unfinished business between them. Thorn had taken everything from Maddox: his freedom, his pride, his legendary status. A showdown was inevitable. Still, he hesitated, not out of fear, but because he'd sworn never to let the people of Silver Ridge suffer again because of him. Maddox noticed the hesitation and smirked. "You worried you ain't as fast as you used to be?" Thorn didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and drew out a folded piece of paper, a wanted poster bearing Maddox's face. "I kept this," he said, "not as a reminder of you, but as a reminder of the kind of man I can't allow to walk free." Maddox's grin faded. For the first time, something human flickered in his eyes, wounded pride, perhaps even regret. The tension between them grew so thick it felt like a living thing. Then, as if pulled by destiny itself, Thorn nodded. "Tomorrow. Sunrise. Out by Devil's Crossing." The crowd gasped. Devil's Crossing, the most dangerous stretch of land for miles. Jagged rocks, uneven ground, and a wind that could throw off even the deadliest aim. A place where no man held the advantage. Maddox tipped his hat. "Sunrise it is." He turned and vanished down the street, his boots thudding like a funeral march. That night, the town went silent. Lamps were dimmed, voices hushed. The saloon remained closed for the first time in 15 years. Men whispered to their wives, mothers prayed over their children, and every single person felt the weight of what was coming. Thorn sat alone in his office, staring at his revolver, the same gun he'd used to defeat Maddox years ago. He cleaned it carefully, knowing that at sunrise, everything he'd built, his peace, his authority, even his life, would be on the line. Outside, the moon rose high, bathing Silver Ridge in pale light. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Maddox prepared as well. Two men separated by duty, anger, history, and fate, each knowing only one of them would walk away. The duel wasn't just a contest of speed. It wasn't just revenge. It was an ending, a reckoning. A moment that would be spoken of for generations as the most dangerous duel ever recorded. And as the hours crept toward dawn, a chill ran through the desert, a whisper of destiny reminding everyone that by sunrise, the sands of Silver Ridge would be stained with the conclusion of a story too big to stay buried. And before we enter the most intense final showdown ever told, make sure you subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Because what happens next is something the West never forgot. Dawn approached with an eerie quiet as Sheriff Elias Thorn rode out to Devil's Crossing, the horizon glowing like an ember refusing to die. The desert stretched endlessly, its jagged rocks and shifting sands forming a battlefield shaped by nature for the sole purpose of breaking men. Thorn dismounted slowly, every movement heavy with the knowledge that this morning would decide not only his fate, but the story the world would whisper long after he was gone. A crimson haze washed over the sky as Colt Maddox appeared on the ridge opposite him, silhouette sharp against the rising sun. Maddox walked down with a calm that chilled the bones, his long coat swaying behind him like a shadow that had gained life. His boots crunched through the sand as he came to stand 30 paces from Thorn. Far enough to force precision, close enough for death to be absolute. For a moment neither spoke. The wind cut across the land, slicing between them like a blade. Two men bound by history, standing on the edge of destiny. Thorn broke the silence first. "It doesn't have to be this way, Colt." Maddox's laugh was dry, hollow. "Doesn't it? You took everything from me. My name, my legend, my life. I ain't leaving this desert until I take something back." Thorn's voice softened. Not with weakness, but with the weight of truth. "You had choices. You could have walked a different path." Maddox's eyes burned. "I did. And that path led me right back here." The sheriff inhaled deeply. There was no turning back. The sun's rim broke over the rocks, casting long, sharp shadows across the ground. The duel was set, and the world seemed to lean closer, listening. Thorn adjusted his stance, boots planted firmly. Maddox rolled his shoulders as if loosening years of frost and rage. The air trembled. The first ray of sun touched the sand, and both men moved. No one later could fully explain what happened in that instant. Witnesses who'd crept onto the cliffs watching the duel claimed time slowed, sound vanished, and the desert held its breath. Maddox drew like lightning, his hand a blur of steel. Thorn moved with disciplined precision, his eyes steady, his breathing calm. Two shots cracked. So close together they sounded like one. A burst of dust leapt from the ground. A crow cried out and took flight, then silence swallowed everything. Maddox staggered first, clutching his side. Thorn exhaled slowly, a thin line of blood appearing on his arm. Both men had landed their shots, but neither had struck true enough to kill. Maddox straightened, snarling with animal fury. Again! He reloaded with frantic speed, his rage blinding him. Thorn hesitated, because he didn't want this. But fate didn't care about mercy. Maddox fired wildly. Thorn dove behind a boulder, bullets sparking off stone. The duel became something else. A hunt, a desperate dance between survival and vengeance. Maddox chased him through the rocks, his footsteps heavy, unsteady. Thorn kept moving, keeping the outlaw at a distance, trying to end this without ending a life. But Maddox was beyond reason. "Fafasimo!" He roared, firing until his gun clicked empty. Thorn stepped from the shadows, revolver drawn but lowered. "Colt, it's over." Maddox pulled a knife from his boot, eyes blazing with finality. "Not until one of us dies," he charged. Thorn, with no time to reload, met him hand to hand. The clash echoed across the canyon, steel flashed. Dust flew. Maddox fought with raw desperation, every swing powered by years of anger. Thorn fought with discipline, blocking, striking, avoiding fatal blows. But Maddox was relentless. He drove Thorn to the edge of a cliff overlooking a drop of jagged stone. One final shove sent both men tumbling dangerously close to the edge. Maddox raised his knife high. Thorn grabbed his wrist. They struggled, breathing ragged blood mixing in the sand. Then, in a moment that became legend, Thorn twisted, using Maddox's momentum against him. The knife flew. Maddox slipped, dangling over the edge, held only by Thorn's grip. Maddox stared up, stunned. "Why won't you let me fall?" Thorn's voice was steady, but his arm trembled from the strain. "Because death isn't justice. It's escape." For the first time, Maddox's expression cracked, not with rage but with something almost like surrender. Thorn pulled him back onto solid ground, both men collapsing in exhaustion. The duel was over. Not won by a bullet, but by choice. Maddox looked at the sky as tears cut through the dirt on his face. "I came here to kill you, and you saved me." Thorn nodded slowly. "Maybe now you can choose a different ending." Hours later, Thorn escorted a quiet, broken Maddox back toward Silver Ridge, not as a prisoner of vengeance, but as a man finally facing the truth of who he'd become. And the people who witnessed the duel would tell their children, and their children's children, how two legends met on the edge of the world, how bullets flew, how the sun rose on destiny, and how the most dangerous duel ever recorded ended not in death, but in something far rarer, mercy.